I'm going to do what I want to do, because this was a violation of international law. Part of the story of Wilkes is caused great discord and almost brought our nation into war with Great Britain. I'm here to tell you a tale of one of the most famous explorers and yet a very undisciplined person, a man that enjoyed inflicting pain on everyone he could, Charles Wilkes. Now, I have to say that Australian explorer Douglas Mawson, who was the first to revisit the East Antarctic shores mapped by the Vincennes. Vincennes was Wilkes's ship, I don't want to go there yet, during his great polar explorations. Actually, he was on a 4-year voyage of exploration, and he actually charted the coast of Antarctica. We'll go into greater detail. But everyone kind of forgot about that. So Mawson so admired the accuracy of the charts. He so admired the whole thought of a wooden sailing ship sailing successfully through 1,500 miles of pack ice that he decided in his map that he did in 1911 was to name one section of Antarctica Wilkes Land. In fact, it is known as the largest contiguous territory on Earth named for a single individual. Now, I got to tell you, while the U.S. exploring expedition, navigation, everything they did brought him great acclaim, his obsessive behavior, his cruelty, and his also superiority complex caused great discord during the Civil War and almost brought our nation into war with Great Britain. So you can say, as we'll probably conclude, that Wilkes was a superior individual, let's put it that way, in his own mind. Okay, so I think that's very good to say. So he's born in 1798 in New York City. He's from a very affluent family. His mother dies in 1803, and his aunt is going to teach him. He speaks perfect French, very brilliant. He then goes to Columbia University, where he'll graduate. When he graduates in 1818, he will then go and join the U.S. Navy. Now, when he joins the U.S. Navy, he is a midshipman. He becomes a past midshipman in 1829, and then he's going to be promoted lieutenant in 1826. Now, so far, there's not a big deal about his career. However, he will be assigned to the Coastal Survey, and he will map Narragansett Bay. And this is like a great achievement of how he mapped it. And everyone says, this guy is really smart, and we want to keep him around. And so the U.S. Navy did not have, like England, the British Navy had Greenwich, where they stored charts, instruments. Well, Wilkes was given the job to create what was known as the Department of Charts and Instruments. Now, this is the building that comes after he was head of this department. Actually, it was the original department was in a building that he owned, and so he kind of claimed afterwards that most of those instruments were his, but that was another story that Matthew Fontaine Maury kind of solved. But he is the precursor to the U.S. Navy Observatory, which became a depot for charts and instruments and mathematics. It was really made a difference to the U.S. Navy, how we collected those charts and utilized them. Well, you know, being a great map maker, being head of this place where you make charts, he will become a member of the Columbian Institute, which are, and the Columbian Institute was where all these leading botanists and mathematicians and other scholars came together to discuss, you know, scientific achievements and what we need to do next and all this great stuff. So he has this contact with all these intellectuals. And as a result of that, in 1836, he will be named as commander of the U.S. Exploring Expedition, which was approved by Congress on 18 May 1836. He's promoted to lieutenant. And so he gathers, again, all these people he knows from the Columbian Academy, artists, botanists, taxidermists, every type of scientist you might think you need to go on this exploration with him. Now, this exploration is going to be using 4 major ships, and those ships are going to be the Vincennes, which is his flagship, and also, well, here he is, on the crown of his glory, Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. You just look at him and tell him he thinks he's superior everywhere he goes. That's the Vincennes, and also the USS Peacock, USS Porpoise, and the supply ship Relief. So he's going to go to uncharted territory. So he begins his trip by going to Madeira to work out his crew. Then he comes down to Rio de Janeiro. Then he will go to Terra del Fuego and Chile, Peru, various archipelagos, Samoa. Then he goes into New South Wales, which is really where the first English settlements are in the Australian continent. He actually will sneak his way into Sydney Harbor without any prior approval or anything. And so when the Sydneyans all wake up the next day, oh my gosh, here is a fleet of U.S. ships in their harbor. So they're all, you know, shocked by this. They'll build some fortifications as a result of it. But you know, that's as part of the story of Wilkes is, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I don't care what you think, you know, because this was a violation of international law. But did he care? No. So from Sydney, he is going to leave, and he's going to go along the coast of Antarctica. And we're going to see a map a little later on, but if you think about how Antarctica has a part that reaches up towards kind of ending up in between Terra del Fuego and Australia, which is commonly called the Drake Passage, you know, that is unexplored. People there know at this time sailing charts to go through the Drake Passage. They don't know what's down below. They just like not to go through the Magellan Straits, etc. But it was a difficult seas, considering the South Atlantic and the South Pacific come together there, making very harsh conditions. Wilkes doesn't care. He will, of course, arrive in Antarctica 25 January 1840, and he does explore 1,500 miles of Antarctic coastline. Now, this is summertime when he is in Antarctica, and as being in summertime, he bravely goes through ice packs to continue. He was planning to circumnavigate Antarctica, but his crew were a little displeased with, you know, being in all this ice and cold and horrible conditions. Wilkes didn't care, but nevertheless, after 1,500 miles, he turns back and goes to Fiji. Now, when in Fiji, he demands food and water and everything like that from the Fijians. And in fact, he sends four sailors and his nephew, Wilkes Henry, to go ashore and barter for some food and things like that. Well, the bartering turns sour, and as a result of that, Wilkes Henry will be killed along with another sailor by the the Fijians. So when they are, this is a big tussle. Wilkes is kind of upset, not necessarily about his nephew, but about the Fijians refusing what he asked for. Consequently, he will send a contingent of blue jackets and Marines ashore, and they will hunt down the Fijian chief, as well as killing 80 natives in the process. He wants to stamp his name on the shores of Fiji, and in doing so, he has proven that he is a really bad person. So you can see Wilkes Land is all the green. So that is tremendous, going around this whole area, and you're going through ice constantly. And he makes some mistakes in mapping because of the mirror images of glaciers and so forth, but generally his map is the map that people will use until the 20th century. And notice how many people have that much land named in your honor. That is pretty tremendous. And really, you can see where part of Antarctica reaches up towards Terra del Fuego, because there's the Drake Passage. So he changes everything. Now, the big trouble is he also will go to Hawaii. There in Hawaii, he has this pendulum, huge pendulum, and he wants to take it up to the summit of Mauna Loa, which is the tallest mountain in the Hawaiian Islands. And so there's a nice little path that people can take for 2 days to get up to the top. He says, oh, no, that's not good enough for me. And he'll forge a new path that takes them 7 days to transit. Now they're carrying these bronze pendulum that is huge, is heavy, and they also, believe it or not, it snows in Hawaii. And all the participants say they had suffered from snow blindness, plus the lava rocks, their shoes fall apart. So some of his men are walking barefooted up to the summit. He will not say, I did the wrong thing. He will go to the summit, and there he's able to measure the gravity, right? As also, he's able to ascertain that Mauna Loa is the tallest mountain in the Hawaiian Islands. He's also able to recognize the different heights of the other mountains. This is one of the greatest chartings of the Hawaiian Islands. In fact, we're still using some of his maps during Pearl Harbor attack. So, he was a great map maker, but he also was very nasty. And we'll get, he doesn't care about the suffering of his men or anything like that. He actually had 2 men carry him up on a cart to go to the summit, so he didn't hurt his feet. So the big thing is then after leaving Hawaii, he will map the Puget Sound, Columbia River, San Francisco Bay, and then he will go back to New York City by way of Borneo, Singapore, Indian Ocean, Cape of Good Hope, and then to New York City, where he will arrive on 10 June 1842. That's a 4-year trip. Now, in this circumnavigation of the world, he will travel 87,000 miles. He begins with 4 major ships and 2 schooners. He'll lose 2 of his ships, one due to his own bad seamanship, and that's the Vincennes, at the mouth of the Columbia River, and he loses 28 men. So when they return, oh my gosh, this one person on board, Dr. Charles Galleux, will actually say, Wilkes is a bad person. These are the things he did during our voyage. And he said that general mistreatment of the sailors, mistreatment of the junior officers, harsh commands, mistreatment of anybody subordinate to him, and excessive punishment of his sailors. Before I started the program, we talked about his favorite tool would be a colt, which is a shorter version of a cat o' nine tails, except it's got knots at the end, and you dip it in salt water and punish the person and then throw salt water on his back. So it's a lasting injury that Wilkes does, and so he gets court-martialed. And the great thing is that they said, okay, you're court-martialed, you're punished, but we will allow you to narrate and put together all the scientific records of the exploring expedition. He does a 5-volume set of these stories. He then does a smaller version, and he will get promoted, despite his court-martial, to commander in 1843. That's in honor of what he had done. And then he'll be promoted to captain in 1855. But guess what? The U.S. Navy is not going to let him get on command of another ship, and they have him just writing all these books and narratives of his voyages of discovery, organizing charts and everything like that. So, now he's a fairly senior officer when the Civil War breaks out, and he will actually be placed in command of a steamer that was built 1855, known as the San Jacinto. Whoa. And the San Jacinto is a typical steamer, a gunboat of the time. It's called a steam frigate. It's got a screw propeller. It has 235 men and officers on board. It's armed with one 100-pounder Parrott rifle, 10 9-inch Dahlgrens, and one 20-pounder Parrott rifle. So it's well armed, and he's given the job of going after Raphael Semmes and the USS or CSS Sumter. Now, because Semmes is already, he's captured 10 ships in the Caribbean area. And so as a result of that, Wilkes goes all over the place trying to find where Semmes is. He misses Semmes, but instead of trying to track Semmes across the South Atlantic, what does he do? He will actually enforce a blockade of St. George's, Bermuda. Actually, he stations one ship, the USS Massachusetts, in Bermuda, or St. George's Harbor in Bermuda, and as a result of that, he will have other ships join the Massachusetts, and for 7 days, they're in a foreign nation's harbor, refusing any orders to, the British have this, what's called Neutrality Act, and so the Neutrality Act said, if you're a foreign nation fighting a war, you could only keep a ship one day in a British port. What is Wilkes doing? Well, I don't care. I'm going to be here, because he knew St. George's was one of the leading havens for blockade runners. And he basically violated the Neutrality Act. He had a true blockade of Bermuda. And basically, he will then go throughout the Caribbean. He goes to Cuba, Sarasota, Cuba, where he learns that the diplomats James River Mason and John Slidell are getting ready to board a Royal Mail steamer, the Trent. Now, these two guys in Wilkes's mind are the enemy and are accursed, because he was anti-slavery. And so actually the two men that are going overseas are major pro-slavers. And so Mason, of course, was born in Virginia. Is a grandson of George Mason, writer of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And so he will actually be a congressman and a senator, and he is pro-slavery. He put forth the idea that the United States needed to conquer Cuba and other islands because they practiced slavery there. And they said, oh, that's going to be real easy, and that will balance the power. Remember, it's all about the power of how many states are slave, how many states are free. And so you have to maintain that balance of power. So he writes the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. It is Mason that gives John C. Calhoun's last speech. Calhoun's dying and is so frail he can't even get up to give the speech, but Mason delivers it anyway. So he actually is wanted because he was engaged in a conspiracy for the destruction of the Union. That's what is written when he's dismissed from Congress. Now, his partner in crime is John Slidell from Louisiana. He had previously been minister to Mexico. He's a senator. He was a pro-slaver who also had a great plan to support filibuster expeditions against Cuba. So this guy, he actually does this great report where he says, oh, you can cut up Cuba into 5 different states where slavery already exists there, and so that will really change the balance of the power. He's big into accepting Kansas without a vote as a slave state. And so this guy, is a true rabble-rouser Southerner. They are named, Mason is named as minister to France, Slidell is made minister to France, and Mason minister to Great Britain. Now, remember, both these nations haven't recognized the Confederacy, but these guys' job is to get them to. So when Wilkes hears about their course of going on the Trent, he will stop the Trent and where is that slide? There you go. Stop the Trent, and he will, I don't know, I have an old leaf in my pocket, I guess from last year. But here you go. The Trent is on the left, San Jacinto is on the right, and they basically fire 2 shots across the bow, and Wilkes demands to inspect the Trent. There they'll find Slidell and Mason, and he arrests them, and he steams up to Boston, where they're going to be placed in Fort Warren as prisoners. actually labeled as traitors to the United States of America. Now, this is pretty serious because when you stop a British ship, that means the Brits are mad. When you take people off a Royal Mail steamer, you violated all these international laws. Wilkes doesn't care. And although he causes these problems, Gideon Welles and the Senate all say, wow, you're a great guy. In fact, the Congress will officially thank Wilkes for his brave, adroit, and patriotic conduct, of course, violating international law. And because this becomes a big symbol, because the United States was worried about Great Britain and France actually recognizing the Confederacy because of their navies, because of their need for cotton, etc. So, this causes a great furor. Actually, Prince Albert, on his deathbed, says, don't go to war with the United States. We need to work this out. Consequently, Charles Adams sends a message to Lincoln, and Lincoln personally disavows Wilkes and says he did bad things, and so we're going to punish him. And he was placed on the retirement list. Now, Mason and Slidell are going to be released on 21 December 1861. Yeah, it just so happens I retire you, but I'm also going to promote you to Commodore, right? That's a big statement. And so, at first, he's going to command the James River Squadron. This shows the San Jacinto in basically a May 8th engagement that didn't happen with the CSS Virginia. That is the San Jacinto again. Whoops. And so here's Mason. He looks mean. So does he. So he will be given command of the James River Squadron. And what they do, they break off part of the North Atlantic blockading squadron to guard the James River, especially during the Peninsula Campaign. He actually goes on board the USS Monitor and says that it is a defective ship requiring repairs and it is not livable for seamen. So that's being nice for him. He's in the James River a little while. He doesn't get along with Louis Goldsborough. He doesn't get along with George McClellan. He doesn't get along with anybody because of the superiority feeling that he has. So they place him in command of what is known as the West Indies Squadron. Their job is to track down the Alabama and the Florida, which they commonly called the Orteto. Basically, so he gathers a force, including San Jacinto, but also the Vanderbilt, which is one of the fastest ships in the U.S. Navy. It's a ram, and he makes that his, his flagship. And so he doesn't chase after the Alabama. In fact, he lets it slip away from Cuba without him bringing it into action. And instead, he disrupted diplomatic relations with British, French, Dutch, Danish, everybody who ruled land in the Caribbean. He would actually blockade their ports temporarily. He actually set up coaling stations on the coast of Bermuda, on the coast of Cuba, so he could maintain his ships at station. And what were they doing? They were harassing the blockade runners. Now, just remember, if you're a blockade runner and you're in St. George's Harbor, Bermuda, and your ship is registered in Great Britain, what are you doing wrong? Nothing. You may think of their intent, but you're not actually violating any law. So this made Wilkes very angry, and so he captures several ships, the Peterhoff, Dolphin, and Victor. This is terrible because Great Britain files a diplomatic protest, so does Denmark, and so does Russia, believe it or not. And so, because Wilkes is doing everything he wanted to do. And so this is one of the ships that he's going to capture. Just remember, he brings a U.S. naval ship into this harbor every day during this summer of 1862. Now, Gideon Wells start writing him and saying, look, you're supposed to go after the Alabama. What are you doing in the Caribbean? Wilkes said, well, I'm doing my duty. And so Gideon Wells says, that's not your duty. Go get the Alabama. And Wilkes would write back these scathing letters saying, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm here. I know what I'm doing. We have to crush the rebellion, and only I can do that. And so that's good for him to say. The big issue is going to be that Wilkes, when he writes replies back to Gideon Wells, guess what happens? He will publish every one of them in, like, the New York Times, other major magazines, so that Wells doesn't like that at all. You're not supposed to do that. That's disobeying a senior officer. So Wilkes is brought back to Washington, D.C., and once again, there's a court of inquiry, which then they press into a court-martial of Wilkes. Now, here's the famous explorer, the hero, the Trent affair. Your public opinion is all behind, guess whom? Wilkes. Wilkes thinks Wilkes thinks that's his due. So what's going to happen is that he will be found guilty in the court of the court-martial and of disobedience of orders. You know, in other words, Gideon Wells says, go after this. He says, I don't want to. I want to blockade this. Insubordination. Well, when Wells, Secretary of the Navy, tells you to go after a certain ship and you don't, and you write back, you don't know what you're doing, I know what I'm doing, and then publish it in a local newspaper, what is that? That's insubordination, disrespect of a senior officer. He disrespected the Secretary of the Navy. That's the type of guy Wilkes was. And he also was found guilty of disobedience of naval regulations, conduct unbecoming an officer, and undue and relentless punishment of his subordinates and sailors. So once again, he has the heavy-handed way of making everybody follow his rules. Now, Wilkes, we found guilty of all charges, of course, because he was very guilty. And so the court-martial finds him guilty. They will suspend him from the U.S. Navy for 3 years. Lincoln steps in and says, oh, no, you're only going to be suspended for 1 year, but we're going to place you in retirement. And so when they place him into retirement, guess what they do? They promote him to rear admiral. So, he, you know, things to say later about it. But the big thing is he's placed on the retirement list. And there he will be in Washington writing about his explorations, also trying to justify the Trent affair. But he becomes kind of neglected, and he dies in 1877. He will eventually be buried in Arlington Cemetery, where his gravestone really says, founder of the Antarctic continent. Okay, so, you know, he thought that was pretty good. Now, what is wrong with Wilkes? Wilkes comes from a upstanding family, reasonably wealthy, and he was very brilliant. had some of the best schooling in America. He had just perfect social skills. To those he felt his equal. To all else, they were not equal to him. He was their betters. And he made it very clear to his subordinate officers that when they're on the expedition, that you have no recourse. You will do what I say or be confined to quarters, etc. I think he disdained everyone who ever questioned his authority or questioned his methods. That's Gideon Welles. That's why he was court-martialed. And basically, he had obsessive behavior and a harsh code of ethics. Many say that Wilkes is the model for Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, written by Herman Melville. And of course, that because you have this court-martial, all of the facts submitted give this tyrant in command of this expedition. His high-handed mannerisms and his conceit did not win him friends. However, it did not take away from his greatest achievement, and that was the founding of Antarctica. His Civil War record, however, can be expressed simply by his own feeling of self-worth, that he can do anything he feels is best for the Union, and that no one understands how to deal with the rebellion like Charles Wilkes. So anyway, that's the story of Charles Wilkes. Do we have any questions?